What are you playing? Is it? All right, you guys. So our next lesson is going to be on the quadratic formula. Okay, so do you know how we just learned how to factor something and then find the x-intercepts? Until now, every question I've given you has been perfectly factorable. Everything's worked out. You haven't run into something where it's not factorable. But of course, in real life, you're not going to have perfect numbers all the time, right? Our x-intercepts aren't always going to be whole numbers. They're not always going to be halves. They can get really, really messy. You can have an x-intercept like 2.8736 or 5.2987. So how exactly do we figure out x-intercepts that are not nice numbers? Well, first, you always try to factor because factoring is the easiest way to solve anything. You quickly try to factor, and you're going to notice in some questions you're not able to factor. When a quadratic equation can't be factored, we're going to use this very handy formula. It's called the quadratic formula. Do you have to memorize it? Yes, you do. You will get really used to it, and you're going to use it all throughout high school. So it's a very important formula for you to remember. But basically, it's x is equal to negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, which is under the square root sign, over 2a. Now, for each of these questions, I'm going to ask you to express your answers as exact answers, which means we're not going to use a calculator. But then I also want you to approximate it, which means you will be using a calculator. So just for this lesson, if you have a calculator, you can take it out. For now, if you don't have one, you can use the phone calculator. Just don't be tempted to scroll through your phone while you're using it. Okay, so 2 examples. That's all we're going to need for practice, and then I'll tell you what you're doing for homework. So the question says solve x squared minus 3x is equal to negative 1. I'm going to first rearrange this so everything is on one side, and it's going to be x squared minus 3x plus 1 is equal to 0. Now, this is a trinomial, and like I said, we will try to factor it because it's always easiest to do that. So when I try to factor it, I put down an x and an x. What are the only 2 numbers that multiply to 1? Yeah, 1 and a 1. And can I ever add or subtract the 1s to get negative 3? No. So this question is not factorable. It is impossible to factor using the methods we've used. So as soon as you try to factor something and you fail, you have to use the quadratic formula. Here's how it works. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label each one of these when it's in standard form. This is your A value, this is your B value, this is your C value. However, we're only looking at the numbers. We're not looking at the x's. So really, the number in front of the x squared is a 1. And if I were to write it on the side, I would write down your A value is a 1. Your B, even though it's negative 3x, we're just looking at the coefficient. So your B value is negative 3. And your C value is a 1. And so if you take a look at your equation, your formula, you're going to notice all we need is A, B, and C. And as long as we have those, we put them together and we solve. Now, this is basically just a recipe. We're going to take the numbers, put them into the formula, and solve. However, there is a lot of room for error, so you have to practice doing this. All right, first, let's practice our formula. So we're going to write it down. I'm going to get this line perfect, and then we're going to write it down, and it's going to be negative b plus or minus, which I'll explain what this means in a second, over b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. By the way, if you don't memorize this formula correctly, then there's just no way you can get the right answer because you will mess up on your calculation, even if you know how to do it. So make sure you memorize the formula. That is a very bright color. It shows up a lot nicer on my screen. I'm going to stick with it to wake you guys up. All right, negative b. Now there's a negative sign here and our b value is negative. So I actually have to include both the negative signs. It's going to be minus negative 3 or negative 3. Actually, it's just cruel to make you look at this. There we go. Okay, then we're going to have our plus or minus sign. I'm not going to forget my square root. B squared is going to be, I need a little bit more room. Why am I struggling? There we go. It's going to be -3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. So even though you're using a calculator, eventually, I still need to see all of this work. I need to see you put in every single value where it should be. Divided by 2, what's your A value? 2 times 1. Okay, we're still not going to use our calculator. We're still going to do everything just from memory, just from mental math. What is -3 going to become? +3 plus or minus. What is -3 squared? +9, good. What is -4 times 1 times 1? -4. And what is 2 times 1? 2. So even if you have a calculator, we haven't used it. We're not going to touch it until the very end. Okay, let's keep going and finish simplifying this question. So here I'm going to have my line, which is not going to look like that. It's going to look like this. And it's going to look like this. And it's going to be 3 plus or minus. What is 9 take away 4? Yep, it's just going to be 5. So actually, I don't even need a line that big. It just needs to be like this big. One day I will make myself proud by getting these lines perfect. Okay, so it's going to be 3 plus or minus √5 over 2. Now, when the question says, give me your answer in exact form, this is what I'm looking for. This answer right here is the exact value. It's like not a decimal. It's exactly what the answer should be. But we want to know where we're going to put this on our x-axis, right? So we're going to continue this question and keep going and actually use our calculator and solve it. Here is what this plus or minus means. There are actually 2 different scenarios for this question. One of the scenarios is the plus version. So we're going to go 3 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2. And the other one is the minus version. So it's going to be 3 subtract square root 5 divided by 2. Now here is where you're going to take out your calculators and you're going to give me a decimal, and it didn't say how much to round it to. Let's just round our decimal place to 2 decimal places. Yeah. So I actually want the entire number. So don't have any fractions or anything. I just want an answer. So for example, see if you get this as one of your answers. And then see if you get this as your other answer. I'll pause here so you guys can try it. Okay, and so if you have gotten these as your answers, just know these are your approximate, because anytime you have decimals and you're rounding, you're not getting the most precise answer. So that's what we mean by approximate. What have we really found here, you guys? So we weren't able to factor this. We use a quadratic formula. What do these x values actually represent? Krishna? Yeah, so on this graph, at 2.62 and 0.38, you would have 2 x-intercepts, which you would estimate as best as you can. All right, one more example. I'll let you go ahead and try it. I'll write the solution on the board, and then we'll see if we get the right answer. But honestly, this is all it is. It's not very complicated. These are the questions. And always, at first, try and factor and see if you can actually factor it. So this question is already in standard form. I can try to factor it. x, x, a 3 and a 1, negative plus, but then you'll never get negative 3. So it's not factorable. This question kind of looks factorable, like when you're trying to factor it, all the numbers seem to work, but then at the end, you can't get that positive 3. So we have negative, negative 2 plus or minus. This is going to be 2 plus or minus, and then inside here, we're going to have 4 minus 12. Oh my gosh, I'm struggling. Pure struggles, yeah? Yep. Nope. You keep it as a negative 8, yeah. Perfect, and that's exactly what we want. So I'm glad you got to that stage. I'll explain it in a second. No, it's not just your calculator. It's exactly what we're looking for. Did you guys get this weird number under your square root sign at negative 8? Did you try to use a calculator to solve it? And what do you notice happens? Error. And so, yeah, it's going to insult you majorly. And basically what this means is when you have a negative sign under your square root, it means there are no roots or no x-intercepts. So how can we explain what's happening? Well, you know how sometimes you can draw a parabola so that it doesn't even go through the x-intercepts? In this example, it is a parabola. It does exist. It just does not have any x-intercepts. And so there's a more complicated way to solve this, which we're not going to learn how to do. All we need to know is recognize that when you have a negative square root sign, there are no roots. That means this parabola will have no x-intercepts. And then we just leave it as that. Your practice questions for this are page 292, numbers 1 to 3, 5, and 6. And I'll just stop the recording here.